Picture this. You're standing in a massive stone arena surrounded by thousands of screaming spectators. The walls around you tower 40 feet high, sloping inward like a giant canyon. Your heart is pounding so hard you can hear it in your ears. You're wearing nothing but a loincloth and some leather padding around your hips and elbows. In front of you is a solid rubber ball, about the size of a bowling ball, weighing somewhere between 6 and 9 pounds. And here's the thing. You can't use your hands, you can't use your feet. You've got to keep this ball in play using only your hips, your thighs, maybe your forearms if you're lucky. Oh, and did I mention that some versions of this game ended with the ultimate price? This isn't just ancient sports history, folks. This is Pok-ta-Pok, the ball game that the Maya played for keeps, where legend says the stakes couldn't possibly be higher. Welcome to the most intense sporting event in human history. So let's get one thing straight right off the bat. When we talk about Pok-ta-Pok, we're not talking about some casual pickup game at the park. This was serious business that spanned over 3,000 years of Mesoamerican civilization. Yeah, you heard that right, 3,000 years. The ancient Olmecs were playing this game around 1400 BCE. That's before the Greeks had their Olympics, before Rome was even a twinkle in Romulus's eye. This game was being played when most of Europe was still figuring out how to farm properly, and it continued through the Maya, the Aztecs, and countless other civilizations until the Spanish showed up in the 1500s and basically shut the whole thing down. Now, different cultures had different names for it. The Maya called it Pok-ta-Pok or Pok-a-Tok, which supposedly comes from the sound the ball made when it hit things. Pok, pok, pok. Kind of like how we say ping pong, right? The Aztecs called it Ullamaliztli. In the Zapotec language, it was called Taladzi. But the game? Essentially the same basic concept across all these cultures, with regional variations that we'll get into. For simplicity, we'll mostly call it Pok-ta-Pok, but just know we're talking about this whole family of ancient Mesoamerican ball games. The courts where they played this game, absolutely mind-blowing. These weren't just marked-off areas on the ground. We're talking about massive architectural projects, some of the most sophisticated sporting venues in the ancient world. The classic court design was shaped like a capital Y, or like two parallel walls creating a long alley with end zones. The playing alley was usually between 80 and 120 feet long, sometimes even longer, and maybe 25 to 30 feet wide. The walls on either side could be anywhere from 8 to 40 feet high, and they sloped inward, creating this oppressive, enclosed feeling. Archaeologists have found over 1,500 of these ball courts across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and even parts of what's now the southwestern United States. That's right, this game spread far and wide. The largest ball court discovered is at Chichen Itza in Mexico, and it's absolutely massive. We're talking about a playing field that's 545 feet long and 225 feet wide. That's bigger than a football field. The walls are 27 feet high. When you stand in that court today, you can barely make out people on the opposite wall. And the acoustics are insane. You can whisper something at one end, and people at the other end, over 500 feet away, can hear you clearly. The ancient builders understood acoustics in ways that still baffle modern engineers. But here's where it gets really interesting. These ball courts weren't just sports facilities. They were sacred spaces. Many of them were built right next to temples and pyramids in the ceremonial centers of cities. The Maya believed that the ball game represented the cosmic struggle between the forces of light and dark, life and the underworld, order and chaos. The court itself symbolized a portal between the earthly realm and Xibalba, the underworld. Playing the game was like reenacting the creation myths, the battles of the gods, the very foundation of the universe. Let's talk about that rubber ball for a second, because it's actually a huge deal. The ancient Mesoamericans were the first people in history to figure out how to make rubber balls. Rubber, in case you didn't know, comes from latex sap harvested from rubber trees, which grew in the tropical regions of Mesoamerica. These ancient engineers figured out that if you mixed the latex sap with juice from morning glory vines, you could create a chemical reaction that made the rubber solid and bouncy. This is basically vulcanization, the same process Charles Goodyear invented in 1839, except the Mesoamericans were doing it 3,000 years earlier. Mind blown. The balls they made were solid rubber, not hollow like modern balls. Solid. This meant they were heavy and dangerous. A 6 to 9 pound solid rubber ball bouncing around at high speeds could absolutely do some damage. There are accounts of players getting seriously hurt, broken bones, crushed ribs, you name it. Spanish chroniclers who witnessed these games in the 1500s wrote about players getting knocked unconscious by the ball. This was not a gentle sport, it was brutal, physical, and dangerous, which honestly makes sense when you think about what was supposedly at stake. So how did you actually play this game? Well, here's where it gets complicated because the rules varied depending on the culture, the time period, and the specific type of game being played. But let's talk about the most common version that we know about from Maya sources and Spanish chronicles. The basic objective was to keep the ball in play and score points by getting it to hit specific targets or into specific zones. You could hit the ball with your hips, thighs, knees, elbows, and in some versions, your upper arms or shoulders. But here's the catch: no hands, no feet. Imagine trying to control a 9-pound rubber ball without using your hands or feet. It's incredibly difficult. The game required insane athleticism, coordination, and practice. In the classic Maya version, there were stone rings mounted high on the walls, maybe 20 feet up. These rings were vertical, not horizontal like a basketball hoop. They were maybe a foot or two in diameter, just barely wider than the ball itself. If you could get the ball through one of those rings, the game was instantly over. You won. Period. But here's the thing. This was incredibly rare. Like scoring a hole-in-one rare. Maybe even rarer. Some historians think that in certain courts the rings might have gone years without anyone scoring through them. When it did happen, it was such a big deal that the scorer could supposedly demand clothing and jewelry from the spectators. People would literally run away from the stadium to avoid having to give up their fancy stuff. But most games were won through points. You scored points by hitting the ball off certain areas, keeping it in play longer than your opponents, or forcing your opponents to let the ball hit the ground on their side. You lost points if the ball went out of bounds on your side, if you hit it with a forbidden body part, or if you couldn't return it properly. It was a bit like volleyball meets racquetball, except way more complicated and way more dangerous. Games could last hours. The physical exertion was enormous. Remember, you're doing all of this with just your hips and thighs while wearing minimal protective padding. Players would develop enormous bruises, welts, and often more serious injuries. The Spanish priest Diego Duran, who documented Aztec culture in the 1500s, wrote that players would rub an ointment on their bodies before games to prevent injuries and make their skin more resilient. He also noted that players had to be incredibly fit because the constant bouncing, diving, and throwing themselves at the ball would exhaust ordinary people within minutes. The players themselves were usually young men, often from the noble classes or from warrior backgrounds, though we have evidence that in some contexts, prisoners or captives were made to play. Teams varied in size from one-on-one matches to teams of 7 or more players. The most common format seems to have been 2 to 3 players per side, but this varied widely. Training for this game started young. Boys who showed promise would be trained from childhood, practicing for hours every day. They'd learn the techniques for hitting the ball with different parts of the body, how to read the ball's trajectory, how to position themselves. It was like training for any elite sport today, except the stakes were way higher. Some players achieved celebrity status, becoming famous throughout their regions, Lords and kings would maintain teams of players, kind of like how wealthy people today might own sports franchises. But let's get specific about this training because it's actually fascinating. Young boys would start around age 7 or 8, usually beginning with a much smaller, lighter ball. They'd practice the fundamental motion, the hip thrust, that's the core technique of the game, over and over until it became muscle memory. Think about how young baseball players practice their swing thousands of times. Same principle here, except the swing is done with your entire lower body. The training facilities were often located near the major ball courts. Archaeological evidence suggests dedicated training areas with practice walls where players could work on their technique without needing a full court. These practice areas would have targets marked on the walls at different heights and angles, forcing players to develop precision and control. Imagine a batting cage, but for learning to hit a ball with your hip while diving through the air. That's what we're talking about. As players progressed, they'd move to heavier balls and more complex drills. They'd practice diving techniques to get under the ball, learning how to fall without getting hurt. They'd work on stamina, running drills for hours to build the cardiovascular endurance needed for a long match. They'd do strength training, though not with weights as we know them. Instead, they'd carry heavy loads, do body weight exercises, engage in wrestling and grappling to build core strength. The diet of ball players was carefully controlled. According to Spanish chroniclers who documented the training regimens, players ate specific foods believed to enhance their performance. Cacao was important, consumed as a bitter drink mixed with chili peppers and cornmeal. This wasn't the sweet hot chocolate we know. This was a serious performance enhancer, loaded with caffeine and nutrients. They'd eat lots of protein from beans, some meat when available. Corn as a staple carbohydrate. Alcohol was generally forbidden during training periods. Mental preparation was also crucial. Players would participate in ceremonies before games, making offerings to the gods, seeking favor and protection. They'd visualize success, a practice that modern sports psychologists recognize as vital for peak performance. The religious and psychological aspects of the game were inseparable from the physical training. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough: the injuries and medical treatment. Players who got hurt, and many did, would be treated by specialized healers who understood the particular injuries associated with the ball game. These healers knew about bone fractures, how to treat bruising and muscle damage, how to reduce swelling. They used herbal remedies, massage techniques, even primitive forms of physical therapy to get players back in action. There were career ball players who played the game for decades, their bodies showing the wear and tear. Archaeological analysis of skeletons from burial sites associated with ball courts shows individuals with arthritis in their hips and knees, bone spurs from repeated impact, healed fractures. These weren't weekend warriors. These were professional athletes who paid the price in their bodies for their dedication to the sport. Some players became coaches and trainers after their playing days were over, passing on their knowledge to the next generation. This created lineages of technique and strategy that were handed down through the years. Certain families became known for producing great players, with sons learning from fathers in a tradition that spanned generations. The social status of elite players was considerable. Successful ball players could marry into noble families, were granted land and privileges, received gifts from admirers. They had a status similar to successful gladiators in Rome or star athletes today. People knew their names, recognized them in the streets, wanted their favor and attention. Now let's talk about the protective gear because this is fascinating. Players wore thick leather or cotton padding around their hips, called a yoke. These could be incredibly elaborate, sometimes decorated with intricate carvings or made from hard stone for ceremonial purposes, though the stone versions were probably just for show, not actual play. Can you imagine trying to play sports wearing a stone belt? The actual playing yokes were heavy leather, designed to protect the hips and provide a solid surface for hitting the ball. They also wore padding on their knees and elbows, and often a padded headband or helmet. Some cultures added shin guards and forearm protectors. Despite all this protection, injuries were common. But here's something interesting. Archaeologists have found skeletal remains of probable ball players showing specific wear patterns on their bones, particularly around the hips, knees, and elbows. These people were playing this game so much that it literally changed their bone structure. That's dedication. The gear also included gloves in some versions, particularly in the Aztec variant of the game. These weren't soft gloves. They were often made of leather reinforced with wood or stone, turning your hand into basically a club for hitting the ball. This obviously made the game different from the pure hip and thigh version, but it shows how the game evolved across different cultures. Now here's where we need to talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the ball court. The ending that supposedly made this game famous and terrifying. The ritual conclusion where someone didn't walk away. For centuries, it was believed and taught that the losing team in Pok-ta-Pok would face the ultimate consequence. Carved stone reliefs from various ball courts show figures in ball-playing gear and ceremonial scenes that strongly suggest this outcome. Spanish chroniclers wrote about it. It became part of the legend. But here's where it gets really complicated and really interesting from a historical perspective. Modern archaeologists and historians have spent decades trying to figure out exactly what was going on, and the answer isn't as simple as losers always faced consequences. Let's unpack this. First off, we absolutely have evidence that ritual endings were associated with the ball game in some contexts. Stone carvings from several ball courts, particularly one at El Tajín in Mexico, show ball players in full gear participating in ceremonies. The iconography strongly suggests a ritual conclusion. At Chichen Itza, there are panels showing teams of players with one figure kneeling and another standing over them holding an implement. The symbolism is pretty clear, but here's the question that's been debated for decades. Was this a regular thing after every game, or was it reserved for special ceremonial occasions? And here's the really wild part that flips everything. Some scholars now think it might have been the winners who faced this fate, not the losers. Wait, what? Yeah, let me explain. In Maya and Aztec cosmology, being chosen for ritual ceremonies was often considered a great honor, not a punishment. It was a path to the divine, a way to ensure your place in the cosmic order and the afterlife. Some scholars argue that the most skilled players, the winners who had demonstrated their prowess and their favor with the gods, might have been the ones selected for this honor. It sounds counterintuitive to us, but in the context of Mesoamerican religion, it makes sense. The Maya sacred text, the Popol Vuh, tells the story of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who go to the underworld and play ball against the lords of Xibalba. They eventually triumph through skill and trickery. This myth was central to Maya understanding of the ball game. The game represented the cosmic struggle, and participating in it, especially at the highest level, connected you directly to the divine. So was every game to such a fate? Almost certainly not. The majority of games were probably sporting contests with normal outcomes. Winners got prestige, losers went home disappointed. Everyone lived to play another day. But on special occasions, major festivals, coronations, important ceremonies, or times of crisis when the gods needed to be appeased, the game took on its ritual significance. A special match would be arranged, often between captive warriors or champions, and the outcome would be determined in the way we've been discussing. Think about it like this. We have gladiatorial combat in ancient Rome, right? Not every fighter faced permanent consequences in every match. Many were professional athletes who fought repeatedly, but in specific contexts, particularly for major spectacles or involving prisoners, the stakes were ultimate. The ball game seems to have worked similarly. Most games were sport, some games were ritual, The ritual games are the ones that got carved in stone and written about by the Spanish, which is why they dominate our historical imagination. One more layer of complexity. Some scholars think that captive warriors from rival cities were forced to play these ritual games. If you were captured in warfare, you might be brought back to the victor's city and made to play in a ceremonial ball game during a festival. This served multiple purposes. It displayed the captor's dominance. It provided a ritual spectacle, and it connected warfare, religion, and sport in a way that reinforced social order. The Spanish chronicler Diego Duran described watching a game in the 1500s where Moctezuma, the Aztec emperor, played against the ruler of Texcoco. This was obviously a high-stakes game between two powerful leaders, but both walked away afterward. However, Duran also described other games where captured warriors were involved, and the endings were different. So context mattered enormously. Let's shift gears and talk about the cultural significance of this game beyond just the dramatic endings. Because honestly, the potential ritual conclusion is the sensational part that grabs headlines, but the real story is about what this game meant to Mesoamerican civilization. The ball game was absolutely central to political life. Lords and kings used it to settle disputes, negotiate alliances, and demonstrate power. If two city-states had a conflict, they might agree to settle it with a ball game instead of warfare, or they might use the game as a proxy for warfare, capturing enemy leaders and forcing them to play. Either way, the ball game became a diplomatic tool. Economically, the game was huge. Remember those rubber balls? Rubber was a valuable trade commodity, and the demand for balls sustained trade networks across Mesoamerica. The production of gear, the leather padding, the elaborate yokes, supported craftspeople. Ball courts became centers of commerce, with markets often set up nearby. On game days, thousands of people would gather, creating economic opportunities for vendors, entertainers, and everyone else trying to make a living. Socially, the ball game was one of the few activities that could bring together people from different classes. Sure, the players were often elite, but the spectators came from all levels of society. Commoners and nobles sat together, cheered together, bet on the outcomes together. In societies that were often rigidly hierarchical, the ball game provided a rare moment of social mixing. Betting was apparently huge. People would wager jewelry, clothing, cacao beans, even property and household members on the outcomes of games. The Spanish chroniclers were shocked by how much people would bet. There are accounts of people losing everything they owned on a single game. Some supposedly even wagered themselves, agreeing to become servants if their team lost. The gambling aspect of the ball game was so ingrained that Spanish priests specifically tried to stamp it out after the conquest, seeing it as both pagan and morally corrupting. Let's paint a picture of what game day was actually like, because this is where the sport really comes alive. Imagine you're a commoner in a Maya city around 800 CE. Word has spread that there's going to be a major ball game in 3 days, maybe to celebrate the completion of a new temple or to mark the summer solstice. You've been looking forward to this for weeks. This is entertainment, social event, and religious ceremony all rolled into one. On game day, you wake up early. The city is already buzzing with activity. Vendors are setting up around the ball court, selling food, corn tamales, cacao drinks, roasted meats, fruits. Others are selling small items for betting, religious offerings, even miniature ball player figurines as souvenirs. Yeah, ancient merchandising was definitely a thing. The air smells like copal incense, smoke, and cooking food. You can hear drums in the distance, getting people excited, building anticipation. You make your way to the ball court and find a spot on the stone terraces that line the walls. These aren't comfortable seats. You're sitting on stone, probably for hours, but nobody cares. The energy in the crowd is electric. People are talking excitedly, showing off what they're planning to bet, speculating about the outcome. Maybe you've got a nice jade bead you're willing to wager on the home team. Your neighbor has brought a finely woven cloth he's ready to bet against you. The players emerge from the end zones, and the crowd absolutely erupts. These guys are local heroes, and everyone knows them. They're wearing their padded gear, their bodies painted with symbolic designs, their leather hip yokes gleaming. They move to the center of the court and perform ritual salutes, first to the Lord sitting in the place of honor, then to the four cardinal directions, then to the gods. Priests are chanting, drums are thundering, and the sound is almost overwhelming, bouncing off the stone walls and creating this incredible acoustic experience. Before the ball is even put into play, there's a ceremony. Offerings are made, prayers are spoken, the ball itself is blessed. The ball represents the sun in Maya cosmology, so starting a ball game is like setting the sun in motion, reenacting creation itself. This isn't just a sporting event, it's a sacred rite. Then finally the ball is thrown into play and the game begins. The sound of the rubber ball hitting the stone walls, that distinctive Pok sound that gives the game its name, echoes through the court. The players are moving with incredible grace and power, diving, twisting their bodies, striking the ball with their hips in motion that look almost impossible. The ball careens off walls, changes direction unpredictably, and the players have to react instantly. The crowd is going absolutely wild. Every good hit gets a roar of approval. Every mistake brings groans or cheers depending on which team you're supporting. People are shouting advice to the players, cursing the other team, celebrating scores. It's chaotic and wonderful, human nature at its most basic. We love watching skilled people compete, and we love being part of a crowd united in shared experience. The game might last 2 hours, maybe 3. It's brutally physical. You can see the players getting tired, their movements becoming slightly less sharp, their breathing labored, but they push through because quitting isn't an option. The crowd's energy drives them forward. By the end, they're covered in sweat, dirt, and bruises, but they're giving everything they have. When a team finally wins, either by score or by the incredibly rare ring shot, the celebration is massive. The winning bettors collect their winnings, often having to chase down losing bettors who are trying to slip away without paying up. The winning players are mobbed by fans, celebrated, given gifts. They've not only won a game, they've proven the favor of the gods, demonstrated their city's prowess, secured glory that will be remembered. The losing players? In a regular game, they slink away disappointed, their pride wounded but otherwise unharmed. They'll train harder and try again next time. But if this is one of those special ritual games we talked about, the atmosphere after the match is very different. It becomes solemn, ceremonial, tinged with awe and reverence rather than simple celebration. What happens next transcends sport and enters the realm of religious mystery. Historical accounts give us glimpses of specific famous games that were remembered for generations. The Spanish friar Diego Duran documented a game between Moctezuma and the ruler of Texcoco that had massive political implications. The two rulers were negotiating alliance terms, and they agreed that a ball game would help divine the will of the gods. Both men were skilled players themselves, which wasn't uncommon for nobility. They played intensely, with their respective courts watching, knowing that the outcome would influence political decisions affecting thousands of lives. According to Duran, Moctezuma won that particular game, and it reinforced his position in the negotiations. But the interesting part is that Duran describes how seriously both rulers took the game. They prepared with fasting and prayer. They consulted with priests about auspicious timing. They played with everything they had because they genuinely believed the outcome reflected divine will. This wasn't symbolic posturing. They really believed it. Another account from the Spanish conquest period describes a game played between teams of Spanish soldiers and indigenous nobles. Cortés apparently encouraged these games as a way to build relationships with local leaders. The indigenous players absolutely dominated, which makes sense since they'd been training since childhood while the Spanish were just trying to figure out the rules. But what's interesting is that these cultural exchange games happened at all, representing a brief moment where sport transcended the conquest's brutal reality. The spectator experience also varied by social class in fascinating ways. The ruling elite sat in special viewing boxes or platforms that gave them the best views and protected them from the sun. They'd have servants bringing them food and drink throughout the game. Middle-class merchants and artisans got decent spots on the terraces if they arrived early. Commoners and the poor packed into whatever space was left, standing if necessary, squeezing in wherever they could find room. But here's what's remarkable. During the actual game, everyone was united. Rich and poor, noble and commoner, all cheering for the same players, all participating in the same moment. The ball court was one of the few spaces in these highly stratified societies where social distinctions temporarily blurred. The shared experience of watching the game created a sense of community that transcended normal social boundaries. The game also served an important religious and educational function. Young people watching the games would learn about their mythology, seeing the cosmic battles of the gods played out in human form. The best players became heroes, role models embodying the virtues of strength, skill, honor, and divine favor. The game taught lessons about cosmic balance, the relationship between humans and gods, and the cyclical nature of existence. Artistically, the ball game inspired incredible creativity. Ball players appear in murals, on pottery, in sculptures, and in jade carvings. Some of the most beautiful examples of Mesoamerican art depict scenes from the ball game or show players in their elaborate gear. The gear itself became art, with stone yokes carved with intricate designs showing gods, animals, and mythological scenes. These stone yokes are now displayed in museums around the world as masterpieces of ancient art. Let's talk about some specific famous ball courts because each has its own fascinating story. The Great Ballcourt at Chichen Itza that I mentioned earlier is probably the most famous. Built around 900 CE, it's enormous and acoustically perfect. But here's something wild. There are skull racks carved on the walls, called zompantli, showing rows and rows of skulls. These racks actually existed in Mesoamerican cities, displaying the skulls of people who had faced various fates, including participants in ritual ball games. At Chichen Itza, the ball court skull racks served as a permanent reminder of the game's ritual significance. The court at Copan in Honduras is smaller but incredibly well preserved, with some of the best stone carvings showing the game in progress. The court at Monte Alban in Oaxaca, Mexico, is one of the oldest, dating back around 2,500 years. It doesn't have rings on the walls, suggesting it represents an earlier form of the game before the ring innovation. El Tajín, a city on Mexico's Gulf Coast, has at least 17 ball courts. 17. This city was absolutely obsessed with the ball game. The South Ball Court there has incredible stone panels showing the entire ritual process associated with the game, giving us our most detailed visual record of what these ceremonies looked like. In the Guatemalan highlands, there's a ball court at Iximche that was still in use when the Spanish arrived. It represents one of the last functioning ball courts before the conquest. The Spanish conquistador Pedro de Alvarado wrote about seeing games played there, describing the skill of the players and the fervor of the spectators. What's really interesting is that ball courts kept evolving architecturally over the centuries. Earlier courts were often simpler, maybe just low walls or benches. Later courts became more elaborate, with higher walls, rings, more complex end zones, and increasingly sophisticated acoustic designs. This evolution tells us that each generation was building on the knowledge of the previous one, refining and improving the courts, just like we keep building better stadiums today. The construction of these courts was itself a massive undertaking, moving the stone blocks, shaping them precisely, getting everything level and aligned. We're talking about thousands of hours of labor by skilled stonemasons. And remember, they did this without metal tools, without wheels, without draft animals. Everything was done with stone tools, human muscle, and incredible engineering knowledge. The fact that many of these courts are still standing 1,000 to 2,000 years later is a testament to their construction quality. Now let's talk about what happened when the Spanish arrived and encountered this game for the first time. The conquistadors were absolutely fascinated and horrified in equal measure. They'd never seen anything like it. Remember, in the 1500s, Europe, sports existed, but nothing like this. The Spanish had jousting, falconry, some early forms of football, but those were either elite activities or chaotic street games. The idea of a codified sport played in purpose-built facilities with standardized rules was largely foreign to them. The Spanish chroniclers wrote extensively about the ball game. Hernán Cortés sent rubber balls back to Spain to show to King Charles V, who was apparently amazed by the bouncing properties of rubber, having never seen anything like it. These were literally the first rubber balls Europeans had ever seen. Spanish priests documented the rules as they understood them, the gear, the courts, everything. Without their writings, we'd know far less about how the game was actually played, but the Spanish also moved quickly to suppress the game. Catholic priests saw it as a pagan practice tied to indigenous religion, which it was. They viewed the ritual endings as barbaric and the gambling as sinful. They destroyed ball courts, banned the game, and punished people caught playing. Within a few decades of the Spanish conquest, the great tradition of Pok-ta-Pok was effectively ended. A practice that had continued for over 3,000 years was shut down in a generation. Some versions of the game survived in remote areas, evolving into new forms. In the Mexican state of Sinaloa, there's a modern game called Ullama that's directly descended from the ancient ball game. It's played with many of the same rules and gear. The players still use their hips to hit a rubber ball, still can't use their hands or feet. The courts are simpler, usually just a dirt field with boundary lines, but the core game is recognizably the same. Ullama is now recognized by UNESCO as intangible cultural heritage, and there are efforts to preserve and promote it. Another descendant game is called Jayalai, or Basque Pelota, which developed in Spain but may have incorporated elements learned from observing indigenous ball games. It uses a curved basket to throw and catch a hard ball against a wall at incredibly high speeds. While it's quite different from Pok-ta-Pok, some historians see connections. In recent years, there's been a revival of interest in Pok-ta-Pok. Modern Maya communities have started playing the game again, both as cultural preservation and as a tourist attraction. At Xcaret, a theme park in Mexico's Riviera Maya, they stage demonstrations of the ancient ball game for tourists, complete with traditional gear and ceremonies. While these modern versions obviously don't include the ritual endings, they give people a sense of what the game looked like, but this revival is more than just tourist entertainment. In indigenous communities across Mexico and Guatemala, young people are rediscovering the ball game as a connection to their heritage. Organizations have formed to preserve and promote traditional ball games, teaching the old techniques and rebuilding the cultural knowledge that was nearly lost during centuries of suppression. In Sinaloa, Mexico, the direct descendant game of Ullama has a dedicated community of players who have kept the tradition alive through centuries. There are actually 3 versions of Ullama still played: Ullama de cadera, which uses the hip like classical Pok-ta-Pok; Ullama de antebrazo, which uses the forearm; and Ullama de mazo, which uses a heavy paddle. The hip version is closest to the ancient game. Players still craft rubber balls using traditional methods, mixing the latex sap with other natural materials. They still wear leather hip protectors. They still play on elongated courts that echo the ancient design. These modern ulama players are often farmers and laborers who play in their spare time, keeping alive a tradition that was once played by kings and emperors. International sports organizations have taken notice. There have been exhibitions at cultural festivals, academic conferences, and even discussions about making traditional Mesoamerican ballgames part of indigenous games competitions alongside other traditional sports from around the world. Archaeologists continue to discover new ball courts, giving us more information about the game's spread and evolution. Just in the last few decades, courts have been found in surprising locations, pushing the known boundaries of the ball game's influence. In 2015, archaeologists discovered what may be the oldest ball court ever found in Chiapas, Mexico, dating back 3,400 years to around 1400 BCE. This pushes back the known origins of the game and suggests that it may have developed even earlier than previously thought. Advanced imaging technology has revealed ball courts that were previously invisible. LiDAR, the same laser technology that's revolutionized archaeology in recent years, can penetrate jungle canopy and detect subtle variations in ground elevation that indicate ancient structures. Using LiDAR, researchers have found dozens of previously unknown ball courts hidden in the jungles of Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico. Each new discovery adds pieces to the puzzle of understanding how widespread and important this game really was. Modern sports scientists have gotten involved too, using biomechanics and physics to understand the game better. Researchers at several universities have built experimental ball courts and crafted balls using traditional methods, then filmed modern athletes attempting to play the game. The results are fascinating. The ball moves faster than you'd expect. A solid rubber ball can actually reach speeds of 50 or 60 miles per hour off a hip strike. The forces involved when the ball impacts the body are significant, comparable to getting hit with a baseball. This explains the heavy padding and the frequent injuries. Analysis of the hip striking motion shows that it requires incredible core strength and flexibility. The player essentially has to generate power from their entire body, transferring it through the hips at the moment of contact. It's a full-body motion, not just a hip thrust. Professional athletes who've attempted to learn the game have described it as one of the most difficult sports movements they've ever tried to master. And remember, ancient players were doing this while diving, jumping, and moving at full speed, often after hours of play. The study of Pok-ta-Pok has also evolved our understanding of rubber technology. Chemical analysis of ancient rubber balls found in sacrificial offerings and cenotes shows that the Mesoamericans experimented with different mixtures and ratios to get the desired bounce and durability. Some balls were mixed to be softer and safer for practice. Others were harder and more lively for actual games. This wasn't just making rubber. This was sophisticated materials engineering. The acoustic properties of ball courts have attracted the attention of acoustical engineers who are amazed at the sophisticated sound design. The Great Ballcourt at Chichen Itza, for instance, has these incredible acoustic properties that can't be accidental. A hand clap at one end produces an echo that sounds like a bird call. A person speaking in a normal voice at one end can be heard clearly at the other end, over 500 feet away. Yet conversations in the middle of the court are surprisingly private, absorbed by the angles of the walls. The ancient builders understood sound waves and acoustic engineering at a level that still impresses modern experts. Some researchers have proposed that these acoustic properties weren't just impressive, they were functional. The ability to hear what's happening anywhere in the court would be crucial for officials judging the game. The bird call echo from clapping might have served as a signal. The various zones of sound privacy and amplification might have organized the ceremonial aspects of the game. Every architectural feature of these courts seems to have been purposeful and sophisticated. The preservation of ball courts has become a priority for cultural heritage organizations. Many courts are threatened by erosion, vandalism, and the growth of vegetation. Conservation efforts are ongoing at major sites like Chichen Itza, Copan, and Monte Alban to stabilize the structures and prevent further deterioration. This work is tricky because you want to preserve the authentic ancient stonework while also preventing collapse that could lose information forever. There's also been fascinating work on reconstructing what these courts looked like in their heyday. We know from chemical analysis of residual paint that the walls were brightly painted, often in red, blue, and white. Using computer modeling and historical descriptions, researchers have created virtual reconstructions showing what the courts might have looked like when they were in use, complete with painted walls, carved stone markers, and crowds of spectators. These reconstructions help us visualize the splendor of these spaces and understand the full sensory experience of attending a game. The cultural impact of rediscovering and studying Pok-ta-Pok extends beyond academics and tourists. For modern Maya and other indigenous peoples in Mexico and Central America, the ball game represents a tangible connection to their ancestors. It's a source of pride, a reminder that their cultures developed sophisticated sports, engineering, and social institutions. In an era when indigenous peoples are often marginalized, the ball game serves as powerful evidence of their ancestors' achievements. Educational programs in Mexico and Guatemala now teach children about Pok-ta-Pok as part of their cultural heritage. Kids learn the rules, practice the basic hip-striking motion, even play modified versions of the game in school. This isn't just history class, it's cultural reclamation, ensuring that knowledge of this ancient practice doesn't completely disappear in the modern world. International museums with collections of Mesoamerican art have created special exhibits about the ball game, displaying stone yokes, carved panels from ball courts, rubber balls, and ceramic figurines of players. These exhibits help a global audience appreciate the sophistication and importance of the game. Major exhibitions in the United States, Europe, and Latin America have introduced millions of people to Pok-ta-Pok who had never heard of it before. There's also been interesting cross-cultural dialogue about the game. Scholars have compared Pok-ta-Pok to other ancient games from around the world, looking for similarities and differences. The Roman gladiatorial games had similar elements of sport, ritual, and high stakes. Ancient Chinese kickball games have some mechanical similarities in terms of keeping a ball in play without using hands. But Pok-ta-Pok remains unique in its specific combination of features and its extraordinary longevity as a cultural practice. The game has even influenced modern art and literature. Contemporary artists of Maya descent have created works inspired by the ball game, exploring themes of tradition, sacrifice, and cultural survival. Novels set in the ancient Maya world almost always include scenes of the ball game because it's so central to understanding that culture. Movies and documentaries about the Maya civilization invariably feature recreations or discussions of Pok-ta-Pok, because it's such a visually striking and conceptually fascinating element of that world. The study of Pok-ta-Pok has also evolved. Modern sports scientists have analyzed the biomechanics of hitting a heavy rubber ball with your hip. It turns out it requires incredible core strength, hip flexibility, and timing. The forces involved when the ball strikes the body are significant, explaining the need for padding and the frequency of injuries. Some researchers have even built experimental courts to test theories about the game, trying to understand the physics and strategies involved. One really cool project involved creating a modern rubber ball using the ancient techniques, mixing latex and morning glory juice, to see how it compared to descriptions in historical sources. The results showed that the ancient balls would have been incredibly bouncy and lively, making the game even more challenging than previously thought. These experimental archaeology projects help bridge the gap between what we can observe in the archaeological record and what the actual experience of playing the game might have been like. Let's think about what Pok-ta-Pok can teach us today. First, it reminds us that sports have always been more than just games. They're tied to culture, religion, politics, and social identity. When we watch the Super Bowl or the World Cup, we're participating in something that has deep cultural meaning beyond just the score. The ancient Mesoamericans understood this profoundly. Second, it shows us the incredible sophistication of ancient American civilizations. Too often people think of the pre-Columbian Americas as somehow less advanced than Europe or Asia. But these people invented vulcanized rubber 3,000 years before it was invented in the West. They built massive stone structures without metal tools. They created games and sports that required years of training and incredible athleticism. They were sophisticated, brilliant, and innovative. Third, the ritual aspects of Pok-ta-Pok remind us that ancient peoples had completely different worldviews than we do. To modern sensibilities, the idea of permanent consequences for a sporting event seems barbaric and incomprehensible. But to the Maya and Aztecs, it was sacred, meaningful, and central to maintaining cosmic order. We can't judge ancient cultures by modern standards. We need to understand them in their own context, on their own terms. Fourth, the suppression of Pok-ta-Pok by the Spanish is a reminder of how colonialism doesn't just conquer land and people, it erases culture. When you destroy cultural practices, you break the connection between people and their heritage. The fact that modern Maya communities are working to revive the ball game is part of a broader process of cultural reclamation and healing from the trauma of colonization. Finally, Pok-ta-Pok reminds us that history is complicated and nuanced. The simple story, losers faced consequences, is dramatic and makes for great headlines. But the reality was far more complex, varying by culture, time period, and context. Most games were probably just games. Some had deeper meaning. Understanding this complexity makes the history richer and more interesting, not less. If you ever get the chance to visit an ancient ball court, I highly recommend it. Stand in the center of the court at Chichen Itza or Copan and just absorb the space. Look at the walls. Imagine them painted in bright colors as they once were. Picture thousands of spectators filling the terraces, their voices echoing off the stone. Imagine the players in their padded gear, bodies tense, watching the ball. Feel the weight of all that history, all those centuries of games played in that exact spot. It's powerful. Try to visualize what it must have been like on a ritual game day. The city gathered, drums pounding, incense burning, the smell of copal resin filling the air, the players entering the court through the end zones, their gear decorated with symbols of their patron gods, the priest king sitting in the place of honor, watching to see how the gods would declare themselves through the game. The tension as the ball is put into play, bouncing off walls, players diving and striking with their hips, the crowd roaring. And then the moment when someone scores, or when one team clearly dominates, and everyone knows the game is decided. The mixture of sport, spectacle, and sacred ritual, all blending together in a way we can barely comprehend today. The legacy of Pok-ta-Pok extends beyond just the game itself. The rubber balls led to a rubber industry that sustained trade across Mesoamerica for millennia. The architectural innovation in building courts influenced other structures. The social institution of the game shaped politics and diplomacy. The symbolic importance of the game influenced art and religion. It was woven into every aspect of Mesoamerican civilization. When we look at ruins of these ball courts today, we're seeing just the bones of what was once a living, vibrant practice. The courts were colorful, loud, full of energy and life. They were the stadiums of their age, the places where communities gathered and legends were made. Players achieved fame that echoed beyond their cities. Games were remembered and talked about for generations. There's something deeply human about all of this. People have always loved games and sports. We've always competed, trained, practiced, sought excellence. We've always used sports to teach values, build community, and express cultural identity. The ancient Mesoamericans took all of this and added layers of cosmic significance that made their ball game unique in human history. So the next time you're watching a game, any game, think about Pok-ta-Pok. Think about those ancient athletes training for hours every day to master the incredibly difficult skill of hitting a ball with their hips. Think about the crowds gathering, the betting, the excitement, the tension. Think about how sports connects us across time and culture. And think about how, in some versions of the game, the stakes literally couldn't be higher, making it perhaps the most intense sporting event humanity has ever devised. Pok-ta-Pok, the game that lasted 3,000 years, spread across an entire region, inspired some of the greatest architecture and art of the ancient Americas, and ended with the arrival of people who couldn't understand what they were seeing. A game where rubber met ritual, where sport met the sacred, where the earthly and divine collided on a stone court under the Mesoamerican sun. That's not just a game, folks. That's human history at its most fascinating, complex, and unforgettable.